Hi everyone, how you doing? And to kind of respond to the feedback I've been getting to the podcast, I've decided to add these introduction segments in, just giving you a brief on the guest and what we'd cover within the episode. So today I'm super excited because it's my first guest actually working at Microsoft. His name is Ryan Jones, and he's the Partner Director of Product Management. He was previously responsible for the Common Data Service, also known as CDS, which is now known as the Dataverse, and is now mainly responsible for managed environments. So as you can guess, we spoke a lot about managed environment. We also cover his journey, the COE toolkit and its future, who should adopt managed environments, and yes, with 14 years at Microsoft, I couldn't help myself but get some career advice at the end as well. So depending on what platform you're watching this, if it's YouTube, make sure to drop a like, a comment if you loved it, and reshare. It does a huge favor to the podcast and a huge favor to me as well of getting the word of the Power Platform out there. And I also want to give a huge thank you to Plumsail, who are the first sponsors of the Power Hour podcast. They've been great to me, and they've also given an exclusive code to the people who tune into this podcast. So the links will be below. Everything you need is there, and they've even got a special video segment in the middle of the podcast so you can see some of their products in action. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and let the podcast play. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hour podcast. I'm so excited today because I'm here with Ryan Jones, Partner Director of Product Management at Microsoft, focusing on low-code and AI enablement, if I can get my words out today. Ryan, thank you so much for doing this. Just a quick introduction onto who you are for the people who may not know, and kind of what your day-to-day responsibilities are at Microsoft.
My name's Ryan. I lead our Power Apps Scale team. And within the Scale team, what we really focus on is how do we help customers and provide customers with the platform that's needed to run, those 10,000 little apps in their organization, as well as those 10 apps that support like 10,000 users each. And so we really focus on ensuring that our managed platform allows our admins and our customers to do that. This includes things like our managed security offerings, our things like our managed governance offerings, our managed operations offerings, and even now managed availability as well.
Yeah. And Ryan, just kind of branching off that, you mentioned kind of a few managed offerings there, and that's all part of the managed environments offering, or are they all kind of separate and respective of one another?
Yeah. We think of, once you manage an environment, you get all of that goodness across those
Mhm.
four pillars. Because when we see, once again, like either admins needing to manage at scale or admins needing to operate things at scale, it's not like you can choose, do I want to be secure or do I want to be available? You need it all. And so
Yeah.
we bundle it all up together. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Sounds good. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to get to the technical know-how, and I'm sure you've spent probably your morning and most of your days explaining it. But I've got to ask because I stalk all of my guests and did the same with you. And I have to, I have to ask because it gave me a lot of curiosity. But your background is in music technology, yet you found yourself shaping Power Platform governance, and I can see your background. You've got electric guitars, a piano. So how did all that come about?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny. It started with, I guess, me dropping out of college at one
Yeah.
point. I was studying pharmacy because at the time that was a very lucrative field, and I realized I was going to be disappointed if I spent my
Mm.
life counting pills, essentially.
Yep. Right.
And so I dropped out of school. My parents told me to get a job, like any parent would do, I think. And then as I went back to school, my mom was in a car accident. And that meant that, I was going to need to pay for my college education. And so I never stopped working. And so during the day, I would, program control systems. If you've ever seen like those Crestron touch screens littered about, corporate campuses or what have you, I used to program those. Um, but what I learned was I was a better programmer than musician. And
Mm.
so I had a choice. Did I want to starve as a musician, or did I want to do okay for myself in technology and then play music on the side? So I chose the latter.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the rest is history because right now you're working at Microsoft, which is awesome. Um, so that kind of gravitation towards programming, how did that evolve?
Well, let's see. I was always fascinated by computers and technology when I was young.
Mhm.
Like even in elementary school, like I'd write some little programs in BASIC, and then as it was more high school, things started shifting more and more towards like PHP and those technologies. But yeah, I started programming control systems. I also did a lot of like acoustical modeling and those sorts of things as well. And then, gosh, I transitioned from that into more traditional IT as I was in grad school. The company that I worked for doing control systems programming lost a major contract, and they told me they didn't need my services anymore. And within my grad school class, there was a gentleman that worked at a staffing company, and he said, "Hey, I've got this opportunity as a like DBA, a database administrator." And I was like, "Well, it sounds like that'll pay the bills. I'll go do that." And so next thing I knew, I was writing, scripts in T-SQL to manage, 55,000 databases for, bunch of different companies around the world, and shifted from that into virtualization because virtualization was becoming super popular. And then sold that company to a telecom. And right as we sold that telecom, I came to Microsoft because they figured, hey, I knew how to build hosting services, right? At the time, we were trying to sell Windows Server and System Center to hosting service providers. They thought I could speak that language. I did that for about 6 months, and then Microsoft really decided to go big on Azure.
Mm.
And so started working on Azure in the product planning group, then switched over to what was at the time called Windows Azure Websites. Did that for a few years, worked on Azure Pack, Azure Stack, then moved to Azure Resource Manager, which is where I built a lot of my experience in management, governance, security capabilities. And then 2017 came over to work in Dataverse and had a brief stint running customer insights. And now I'm over here doing Power App Scale and Manage Platform.
Yeah, that's awesome. So maybe the job title you have, it could have thrown me off, but it could be, literal. So it's product manager or partner director, product manager, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Um, so does it require technical kind of day-to-day work, or is it more kind of a product perspective? Like how does that work at Microsoft for you?
It's definitely both.
Mm.
Now, I will say the role has evolved over time in that we do focus more on product aspects now than we did when I joined the company, 11 years, or no, not 11, it was in 2011, 14 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, I would say, but at the end of the day, we do build technical products, right? We are a technology company. And so while I am first and foremost accountable for understanding the problems our customers have, understanding who our customers are, what their unmet needs are, what their skill sets are, at the end of the day, I also have to be able to articulate what that can look like in terms of a technical solution. So, sometimes when folks ask me, like, oh, what's the blend? I'm like, you're like 60% product, 40% technical is kind of the way that I look at it. Of course, one of the cool things about Microsoft is within each group, that actually varies quite a bit. And so if you look at someone, for example, in our Azure organization, there's a good chance that their product managers will be more technical than a product manager that's in, and I'm just going to pick something here, Xbox or something like that, right? Um, so hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely, it does. And, you spoke about kind of your evolution, and I was kind of listening to some of the podcasts you've done with Mark Smith, and also some of the other kind of events and live sessions that you've done for Microsoft. And yeah, I saw that you were kind of overarching I believe, the Common Data Service, which evolved into Dataverse, and then
Yeah.
now you're kind of into this managed environments role, which is really cool because I love managed environments. So where are we right now with managed environments and then the offerings that kind of has? So you kind of went over the general gist of what it is, but kind of where are we with it right now? And obviously without giving away too much, where do you kind of see it going?
Yeah, so growth of usage in managed environments is exploding. Um, what we are finding is when we provide our administrators with the tools that they need to secure, govern, operate, and maintain availability of their apps, automations, and agents, that really helps them provide the supply to meet the demand for low code or digital transformation technologies within their organization. And so usage and specifically paid usage is growing very, very quickly. Also, my check continues to clear, every 2 weeks, which is a good thing. And so
Yeah.
I'm going to take that as, hey, things are going all right and we're doing the right thing. Um, oh, did I answer your question?
I believe so. Yes. I mean, I think in terms of the kind of where we are with it now, and then in terms of where we're going with it, you've seen quite a bit of adoption that you mentioned. Is there any kind of plans? I think a big one that people have, and I've seen on LinkedIn predominantly, is around the COE Starter Kit. So, obviously that is a free offering. You can kind of just import it into your environments, and then control governance in that way. Obviously, managed environments and the managed kind of offerings that you were speaking about come out of the box. But how do you see the COE starter kit and then kind of managed availability slash environments working either together, or do you see one replacing the other, being managed environments replacing the COE starter kit?
Yeah, I look at it this way. Today, if an organization had deployed Power Platform at scale and had not deployed the COE toolkit, I would be a little baffled,
Mm,
right? Because a lot of the visibility that the toolkit provides and the tools that it provides are kind of necessary today. And so one of our goals is to see to it that if someone wants to run and operate the Power Platform at scale, they can do it using managed environments and they don't have to deploy the COE toolkit because
right.
as everyone knows that has worked with it, it does take a fair amount of effort and it has a fair amount of expense when it comes to operating as well. And so you want to be able to provide that functionality out of box with managed environments. Now, I also think that the role of the COE toolkit is going to evolve as well. Because if you look at how the toolkit provides a lot of its governance and operational capabilities, it does so in a fairly reactive manner. And many of the capabilities that we're building in managed environments are much more proactive, right? And so the thing is, if you have proactive governance, you probably aren't going to need the same degree of reactive governance tooling. And so what I foresee is over time, the COE toolkit will evolve to cover a different set of problems than what we've addressed through managed environments, including templates and ways to start using the various governance and security primitives that we have within our managed platform. Providing capabilities that don't necessarily make sense to be in the product. An example that I cite is like environment request apps or sites. Those are so fully bespoke for every customer. It doesn't really make a lot
Mm,
of sense for us to build that into the product itself. And so I think the COE toolkit will evolve. And over time, while there's overlap today between what the COE toolkit and managed environments does, I think over time they will evolve to be much more complementary.
yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, I've had a bit of experience with managed environments, and it was a case of studying it, understanding the capabilities of it. I think one of the standout features for me is the built-in deployments. I call it Power Pipelines. I don't think that's the official name. Maybe it is. But yeah, the built-in deployments, I think they're really cool. I was kind of researching and I was like, all right, I think this is the one that we should use. And I came across the cost. Now, I'm not against Microsoft making money for themselves. Every business has to operate. But in terms of the cost challenges of managed environments, how do you kind of approach that with customers? Because obviously, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but each user within the environment that's managed would have to have a premium license. So how do you kind of approach those challenges?
Yeah, I think that first I would say it depends on the customer. Okay.
Mm,
The way that I'm going to discuss this with a customer that has, hundreds of thousands of employees is going to be very different from the discussion that I have with a customer that has 10
right.
employees, right? Um, but I think that, in fact, there's this famous quote from Oscar Wilde, which is, a cynic, they know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. I think a
Mm,
lot of times, when we look at the cost of running an at-scale Power Platform deployment using just the COE toolkit, we see that you need a fair amount of humans to do that. And those humans cost a lot of money.
yeah.
And they end up working really hard and they end up working very reactively. And so I think a lot of times, if you look at the broader total cost of ownership, the cost of managed environments, it very quickly pays for itself. The other thing that we see is that, and for customers in highly regulated industries, the cost of like a single security, privacy, governance incident from a liability perspective is far greater than the cost of managed environments, and so there it's a risk calculation for those customers. So I think that we see, at the end of the day, like the value proposition is quite compelling, and you know we invest a lot in seeing to it that people can have great change management over the top of the assets that they're moving between their environments, that they have admin approvals, that they have delegated deployments, that they have great experiences like the deployment hub and the monitoring hub. And at the end of the day, it costs Microsoft a tremendous amount of money for us to develop that. Customers see value in it, and so that's why we package it the way we do.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And that was a great answer, by the way. I'm going to use that when I'm trying to negotiate with people on why they need to use managed environments. So that helps me a lot.
Awesome. And
Um,
one more thing, actually, like
yeah, please.
remember, there are really like three reasons that people buy premium, right? Number one, security governance managed platform, right? Number two is enterprise data connectivity. And number three is all the cool things that we're doing around AI and agents, right?
Hmm.
And so I would also say, like, we do have customers, a lot of customers actually, that buy it just for a managed platform. But I also
Hmm.
think that looking at that broader value that the platform provides is quite important.
Right.
Because one of the things that we do see is many customers got started using the Power Platform as a way that they, provide a custom experience over SharePoint, or, create a workflow that gets triggered by SharePoint. That's really different than other customers that use apps and automate over the top of SAP for like expense reconciliation or those sorts of things, right?
Hmm.
And perceived value of the SharePoint scenario is generally lower than perceived value of the SAP scenario. And so I think that's something else that we see is the things that you can do and that our customers do with the Power Platform are very different from the set of introductory scenarios where someone like, use the wizard to create the three-screen app over the top of their SharePoint list.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think you may have indirectly answered this question in kind of what we were just speaking about then, but it's in relation into who should be adopting managed environments. So I know obviously, you own the product respectfully at Microsoft, but is there anyone where you'd recommend for them to not pursue managed environments, or would you say in general if they don't have any governance, they should be doing managed environments.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned this. A couple weeks ago, I was in Texas for an event, and I met up with childhood best friend. Okay.
Hmm.
And he asked me, "Hey, what are you working on these days?" And I'm like, "Oh, I work on Power Platform." And he's like, "Really?" He's like, "I built a Power Automate workflow the other day." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Cool, tell me about it." And he did. And he's like, "And I started using like that agent builder thing." He's like, "We just bought this other company, and so I put all my documents in the agent builder, and so people could ask, because we just acquired them, like, what's the paid time off policy? Ask questions about like the employee handbook." And he's like, "It was pretty simple. It was pretty cool." And so he started asking me more about, the capabilities that I work on within the Power Platform. And I explained to him, how we build these capabilities. At the end of the day, they're built for admins, right? They're built for IT, the stuff that my team builds. And as I said that, he kind of laughed. And he's like, "Admins? What admin?" And he then proceeded to explain to me, like their company is so small they don't really have an IT admin, right? Their global admin is like the, owner of the company and his friends, right?
Mm. Right.
It doesn't make sense for their company to use managed environments. They have like 50 employees, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that's a great example of folks that like, and don't get me wrong, I want everybody to use our capabilities, but like if I was running that company, would I pay for Power Apps for managed environments? No. Now,
Mm.
would I pay for it for enterprise data connectivity? Almost certainly. Would I pay for it for, AI capabilities? Perhaps, depending on the apps that I needed for my organization. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I think that's a great story to justify it. It's funny that you met with a childhood friend and they were building stuff with Power Automate. Um, yeah, I mean, I think in terms of managed environments, that kind of covers all of the main questions I've had. One that I've just kind of thought about was deployments. Like, I love the deployment features. I've seen a bunch of content around it, and I think for me, as I mentioned, I think that's the most attractive feature of managed environments. That I've seen at least. So I boiled down Power Platform deployments to like three different ways before, even during managed environments. And one is manual deployment, so just exporting and then importing a solution. The other one would be Azure DevOps pipeline, so having that CI/CD kind of integration between the environments. And then the last one, which is now kind of what I call Power Pipelines, which is the inbuilt deployments, which I think is really neat. Again, without giving away too much, what are you envisioning for that to kind of evolve into, or are you kind of happy with the way the deployments are working now?
So I am happy with how things are working today, but I'm not satisfied. Okay.
Right, got you.
That's a big part of our culture at Microsoft, right? Like
Hmm.
always continuing to pursue excellence and continued improvements. And so I think that, I think of our investments in three ways. Number one is think about how you even talked about like manual import, export, ADO, and then pipelines. Like, what's the real difference between those? It really boils down to how well those capabilities work out of the box, right? How quickly you can get to success using those, and like simplicity of ease of use for the person submitting the solution or the package to be deployed,
Right,
right? I envision a world where deployments are as simple as like copying a file
right.
in SharePoint,
Yeah,
right? Like, and that's going to be really important for us as we go through this agentic and AI revolution because we're already seeing new groups of people that are even earlier on in their understanding of technical concepts now building agents. And so we're going to have to make deployments and change management even simpler to meet the needs of that audience. Okay, so
yeah,
that's area number one that's really important to us. Number two is we see more and more pro developers starting to use the Power Platform. And so for them, capabilities like native source control integration, and those sorts of capabilities are super, super important. And since many of those types of users also work on those like really, really big apps that serve, tens or hundreds of thousands of users, it's important that we invest at that advanced end of the spectrum too.
Hmm.
And then the final area of investment for us that's super important is, of course, around agents and making sure that agents are easily deployable, easily maintainable across different stages of environments and exposure. And so that's a major area of investment for us as well, because it is interesting how, like apps and automations, we've had connections for a long time, right? And with environment variables and connection references and those sorts of things, we've gotten those to a good place. But like, what does it mean where you have an agent that, yes, it has connections, but it also has knowledge? How should
Mm.
those knowledge references be handled across development, testing, and production environments? So we really want to make sure that that stuff like works really well and makes sense, not only for the advanced user, but for the simple user that's built an agent that they're proud of and they want to deploy to their whole organization, but they need to do that reliably, safely, and IT needs to be able to look at, understand what that agent is, what it does, and safely approve it for deployment for the
Yeah,
broader organization.
abs absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense. And I've seen Microsoft experimenting with those kind of features like agent collections, etc. Very interesting stuff. And I think it's a learning experience, definitely. But I can definitely see Microsoft moving into the direction of trying to make it as accessible as possible. Have you ever spent an entire afternoon wrestling with a SharePoint form, just trying to make it and basically act like the way you want it to? Yeah, me too. And sometimes, as a Power Platform architect, the Microsoft tools can feel a little bit boxed in. So I like to have that added integration and extensibility when I need it. Plumsail is absolutely amazing for that. Manual document merges, external data kept and left in an email, or not trying to make SharePoint forms look like they were made in 2005. Plumsail can solve all of these problems and integrate directly into your Microsoft 365 suite. It's kind of like the Swiss Army knife for M365 products. You kind of just plug and play, and you've got the whole extensibility options open to you. You can automate your work routine and do it much faster. So Plumsail have a suite of tools, starting from Plumsail Forms for SharePoint. It's a huge upgrade over built-in form customization, intuitive drag-and-drop designer for creating modern and functional forms with features like validation. Personally, I love the JavaScript that's integrated within it, so you can kind of, as far as your imagination can go, you can add those customizations to the form. They've also got public forms, which is like a flexible form builder for creating external facing forms. So right now in the Power Platform, the only thing that's kind of solving that is Power Pages, which the overhead can be a little bit more extensive than maybe what you need. So if you're looking for something simpler, public forms is the way to go. And I'll show you a quick demo of that here. You've got Plumsail Documents, which eliminates the manual document work. So if you can imagine generating invoices, it will do all of that for you. Help desk for SharePoint. So this is like a fully native ticketing system built into SharePoint. So if you need that, that also solves your need. And you've also got org chart, which just lets you visualize your organizational structure based on M365 or the Azure Active Directory. So you've got all of that available to you. So enough of the fluff, let me actually show you how they work. So right now I'm going to show you how a public form works, which is one of my favorite tools that Plumsail have to offer. And I'm on their main website, and if I come to templates, you can see they've got a wide range of templates that you can use. We're just going to create one from scratch, but if you want to create one from a template, you can see that you've got a bunch of different options, including a t-shirt order form, which is actually really cool. And if I come into here, come into forms within my Plumsail navigation and select create form, they've now added a really cool feature which allows you to integrate directly into your SharePoint list. So if you need external people, unauthenticated people to put data into your system, you can do that using this. So if I come into settings, connection, SharePoint, I get the site URL. So I will come here into home, refresh this. I'll take the URL and I'll paste it here. And then now you can see it's connected to my lists and libraries. So now I can do donations, for example. and then the content type is item, and then I can select connect. So now I've got that. Now when I come back into my designer, you can see I've got the SharePoint fields from that donation list. So here I've got my donation list. I've got like full name, which is the title, email, comments, donation amount, etc. So if I come into here, I can pull all of these in now. Comments, donation amount, and then I've got the full CSS and JavaScript editor open to me, which is again a huge flexibility of these forms. Oh, I need to put a full name. Donations. That's fine. So let's see the data going into SharePoint. So if I preview this and then I put in my name, so that's really annoying. And then submit, you can see it'll say thanks for submitting the form. And then if I come into here and refresh, that's not good. There we go. You can see the data came into the system nicely. So that's the public forms. Now I'm going to show you the SharePoint forms. So what I've got is the SharePoint app client here, which I've connected to my SharePoint site. And if I select connect here, you can see it's going to ask me for the list or document library I want to edit, and then the item, and then we can open this. So here I'm in my form designer. As you can see, fully customizable JavaScript, CSS. You can make it look as nice as possible. Here, I'm just going to show it for demo purposes, but imagine I want to capture, I want a data table, I want an ink sketch. I'm just having fun with the features now. I'm going to come into here and select new and display, and then save this form. Yes, we want to change those. And then you'll see the form has been saved. I'll close out of this, do a hard refresh, and then select add new item. And then you can see that's all been added. So you get the flexibility of Plumsail directly within your SharePoint forms. And it's all really, really seamless and really easy to use. So great stuff. So if you're ready to kill the busy work and integrate directly with your Microsoft systems, Plumsail have been generous enough to give my viewers a code, Howden. It should be here on the screen. You get 10% off of your first year if you love it. And you also get a free trial just by testing out some of the features. So if you feel like you know a customer or even yourself who would benefit from these forms, or Plumsail's whole offering, I highly recommend checking out the link below and submitting my code if you want that discount. And again, finally, a huge thank you to Plumsail for allowing me to make this content free. Them sponsoring this video is going a long way to doing that. So yeah, huge thank you to them. Great people, great support, and highly recommend them. Anyway, let's get back to the podcast. Ryan, I feel like Dataverse, managed environments, these are all things that you've spoken about on different podcasts, and you know, it's your day-to-day, it's your bread and butter. I'm really curious about your Microsoft journey. Like 14 years in a company is a very long time. And I'm sure you've had some really high ups and then perhaps some mishaps as well on your journey there. So is there anything we can learn from your journey? Is there anything that you've learned personally from that journey and that you apply to your day-to-day life and professional life?
I have two thoughts. One is every person on the planet is a superhero, and that every one of us has a superpower. And so much of success is either finding or luckily falling into a place where that superpower that we possess as individuals is something that a given business or a given product desperately needs, right? When I came to start working on Dataverse, the reason that Charles recruited me to do that was because of my background in continuous improvement of high-scale distributed systems. That's why he asked me to do that. That was my superpower. That was a problem that he had and he needed solved. And so he asked me to come help, right? So I'd say one, knowing your superpower and then finding someone that needs it and values it is really, really important. So maybe that would be like thought number one. Actually, I can even give examples of how that's played out in my career journey. When I came to Microsoft, like I said, very shortly after I joined, we pivoted and became very serious about Azure and growing Azure. What is Azure? Azure is, yes, it's a cloud, but like back when I joined, what did the cloud compete with? Traditional hosting service providers. Where had I worked for the last several years before that? Hosting service providers. And so I had a superpower in that I'd already had to think about and solve many of the product and technical challenges that we as Microsoft were looking to solve, right? Um, and so I've just kind of replayed that over and over through my career and trying to find where people had a need and where I'm uniquely suited for that. Even when we look at what I'm doing today in Power Apps, if we look at environment groups and rules as an example, you'll notice a lot of common aspects of that if you look at Azure policy and management groups within Azure. Why is that? Well, partially because I built Azure policy and because I built management groups when I was in Azure. And so the thing is, this governance at scale thing was a big problem that Power Apps had, and I was uniquely suited to be able to help and fix that. So anyway, example of that. The second thing I would say is the people that we work with is unbelievably important, right? Because yes, we use technology, we build products, we help customers, but the way that we do that is by interacting with people all day, every day. And I think that it is unbelievably important that we surround ourselves with people that will challenge us to learn and grow, that will encourage us, because sometimes when you're pushing yourself hard, you're going to mess up, right? And you want to work with people that when you trip, they extend a hand to help you up, as opposed to stand there and watch while you're on the ground, or worse, even, kick. And so I think that the importance of choosing who we work with is very important. Um, to the point that something I encourage people that I mentor as they're interviewing or looking for new roles, I encourage them to think about, of course, one, what's their superpower? But two, that interview, a lot of times we think about it as the company or the team interviewing the individual, but let's be real. Folks are highly qualified in most cases. And so that opportunity is as much for the candidate to interview the team and the company as anything else. And so, yeah, I encourage folks really think about who you work with. It's so, so, so important.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I don't know where I got it from, but there's something that always ticks away in my mind, and it's you're the average of the closest five people around you. And I think it's equally so at work. If you're seeing everyone else kicking people when they're down, even if it's not in your nature, if you're in and around enough of it, eventually you could turn into that person, and that sucks because there's a lot of great people who are a product of their environment, and they really shouldn't be. But I definitely agree with if you can find good people to work with, and I genuinely believe you can feel that in your gut when they're good people to work with, um, you will thrive. And I love that you said that, Ryan. I try and make these episodes as practical as possible, and you've given so much practical advice already. But just to delve a little bit deeper without being too pedantic, but you mentioned superpowers, and I love that. How do you find your superpower? Because there's a lot of people saying, okay, I'm kind of, I can kind of do everything. I could do, for example, technically, I could do a bit of Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI. I could do a bit of data migration, etc. I'm all for niching down, and I feel like that's what you were hinting at as well in some respect. Because whilst people can also do that, I don't think they'll be able to niche down as much as you can in one thing. They might pick something else, or they might not be as good as that thing. So when you're mentoring those people, what advice would you give to them in terms of how they'd find that superpower?
I think that there are multiple dimensions of
Mm.
this. One is what are the things that, you really enjoy doing? Now, this is dangerous because sometimes we like doing things that
Yeah,
we maybe aren't as good at, right?
Yeah,
Like,
100%.
I am embarrassed to say, like, while I'm at Microsoft, I've got a great career here in technology, but like, there's a reason that I'm sitting here in front of a webcam and on a microphone and a keyboard monitors instead of like, standing with one of my guitars, right?
Mm.
Like, I
Right.
might love that, but that might not be what I'm best at. So,
Yeah.
take that question with a grain of salt. The second thing is, and this is important, and I think a lot of people struggle with it, as you do things, measure the impact and the outcome of the work that you're doing, right? Don't measure the activity. Nobody cares about the activity. They care about the outcome and the impact. To go to a music metaphor, right? Nobody cares if you rehearsed 4 hours, 40 hours, or 400 hours before the performance. What do they care about? The quality of the performance, right? Um, and so, if we think about how we look at that and measure that at Microsoft, we look at it in terms of usage, we look at it in terms of satisfaction, we look at it in a distant third in terms of revenue. If we think about like service fundamentals, we look at it in terms of availability, latency, supportability, COGS or efficiency, supportability, but really look at and measure the work that you're doing because that measurement helps you understand one, if you're being effective or not, and helps you identify places where you can learn and grow. But it also helps you benchmark or baseline. And I don't like to say compare, but like, let's say evaluate the impact that you've been able to drive relative to others. And I think that kind of between those things, because what you're doing is when we talk about what you love to do, that's you identifying your passions, right? And as you measure, you're identifying your abilities. And as it's like aligning those passions and abilities to the needs of the business, that's really where that magic happens. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, it absolutely does. I love that. And I'm a huge advocate as well for even if you're working for a company, I believe respectfully in entrepreneurship even within that company, right? Innovation, kind of practicality, those are all kind of skills that you can draw from entrepreneurship, and that can be applied to either your own business or the company that you're working with. And yeah, no, I think it's great advice. And yeah, it's funny that you speak about balancing that between kind of what you like and then what you are giving value for. Like, I'm a sucker for video games. I got an Xbox 360 when I was like 12 and I never went back. So yeah, literally, I'm thinking about playing God of War this evening and just kind of messing with on my PlayStation, not my Xbox. But yeah, this is a Microsoft call, so we won't speak about the PlayStation here. But in general, I think that's great advice. Um, I'm really curious about the advice that you'd give new professionals. So people who are just kind of up and coming. So I graduated not too long ago. I'm a bit older than I look, unfortunately, but I graduated not too long ago. And there were a lot of people seeing what I was doing because I was fortunate enough to get a Power Platform role while I was still in uni. And there were people that were kind of looking at that and they're like, how did you do that? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it was a shame that they weren't getting the support that they needed at the university. But I could see them really struggling. And a lot of those people went back home and lived with their parents, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I know that's not what they wanted. So, what would you say to those final year people graduating, applying for those grad roles? I don't know if you have assessment centers in the States, but we definitely have them in the UK where a bunch of grads go in and compete for a job. People who are doing those types of things, what would you say to them?
If I can be honest, I don't know. Because my career journey, as I shared, you know, I worked the whole time I was in college out of necessity. Between undergrad and grad school, I had 3 days off, um, and I've been continuously, employed in one way or another ever ever since. Like I mentioned, during one phase of my career, I was laid off, but I was working another job at that time anyway. So,
Hmm.
so I don't, this is a place where I don't know if I have good perspective to share. Um, what, what I would say is, find what you love, find what you're good at, and find what people need. Um, Network, find people, leverage the networks of your friends and families. Because, gosh, I even remember, wow, that place where I was doing that control systems programming. I found out and learned about that company because they installed the sound system at the church my parents attended.
That's crazy.
Right. And I called up the salesperson that I knew there and pretty much annoyed him until they gave me a job. First, actually, by the way, pulling wire before they had me start doing programming work. So, and then, when I think, gosh, I also had at that time a job with a large credit card processing company. How did I get that? Like, my dad was in a social forum with the guy that ran the IT department. Now I realize like I'm very fortunate and privileged to have like a network that I could use that way. But even now, given that I've been at Microsoft for 14 years, I know a lot of folks around the company. And so people come to me all the time asking, "Hey, do you know of openings here or openings there?" And, like, I don't know who's hiring at the other end of the company, but I can ask people, "Hey, like, what are you looking for? What do you want to do?" And I can rattle off for them a set of different types of roles or jobs, and then I can connect them with people that that are hiring in those types of roles. So
Mm.
I don't know. I'm rambling. I don't know if I really answered your question. I
No,
apologize.
I mean, no, 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 not at all, Ryan. I mean, I think you hinted at something very important and something I encourage a lot of people to do, which is to build their network. And you mentioned that you believe you're privileged. I believe that um we have circumstances, but I don't believe in luck. I believe your story is one of persistence and determination. You just mentioned you had 3 days off in that span of I believe, college or university, as we call it here, and that doesn't come naturally to some people. But for you, I'm sure it's not. It makes no sense to not work, right? And I feel like that's something that was ingrained in you, and perhaps that is your superpower, very deep down, which is really cool because I have a lot of respect for people like that. Um, Thank you for this, Ryan. Thank you for coming on this podcast and sharing your insights. I certainly learned a lot, and I know the people at home learned a lot. If I learned a lot, well, I hope so. But I always like to ask this question because it's very important to me, but I feel like everyone has a different answer, and it's around happiness. So, what does happiness mean to you?
Oh gosh. There's a big difference between happiness and joy, and that's probably a subject for a podcast in its own right. But I would say happiness for me right now involves spending time with my wife, my two daughters, our big dog, and just being together, relaxing, and also just us being there, who we are, being enough, and that being sufficient. Because in technology in particular, we are subjected to so much change, and we fear irrelevance if we don't keep up with that change. And we
Mm-hmm.
live in a world of constant improvement. Happiness is those moments where we can spend time with those that we love and that we care about, and simply being there and existing with one another is enough. It's
Yeah.
sufficient.
I love that. That's a great answer. And I think it coalesces with something I was thinking about, which, or something someone's, last, not the last guest, but a few guests ago said, which was around riding the waves and staying around people you love and just accepting that even though right now it might be calm, a month or two later it might not be. But as long as you've got those people around you, as you've mentioned, your two daughters, your wife, and even your dog, I think it's important to have that support network. And important to know that you can have that home base to come to no matter what happens at work, no matter what happens outside. You can come back and you've got that contentment. Ryan, I know these were some tough and thought-provoking questions, I hope. But thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for your time. You're super generous with it. I know you've got a few other podcasts that you've done, and also some videos online that people can check out. But other than that, where can the people find you if they have any questions or if they just want to see what you're up to? The floor is yours.
I'd say, I'm on LinkedIn, like RJ Max or Ryan Jones. There are a few Ryan Joneses at Microsoft, but I'm the only one with red hair. So you can find me there. I do have a Twitter handle, but I don't think I've logged into Twitter or X or whatever it's called nowadays since whatever happened there. So I'd say, I'm on LinkedIn, and so y'all can reach out to me there. I'm happy to help any way I can.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Ryan Jones, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the Power Hour podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Take it easy. Bye.